A hypothesis says every time you make a choice, the universe splits. Some scientists think our universe is just one bubble in an infinite sea of others. And there's a massive cold patch out there no one can explain, a mark some believe was left behind when another universe brushed against ours. This is disturbing evidence alternate versions of Earth exist. There's a scientific interpretation of reality that basically says every time something happens, the universe splits, one where it did and one where it didn't. Star Trek The Next Generation covered this in an episode called Parallels. In the science world, though, it's known as the many worlds interpretation, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. What he meant was that when a particle could go left or right, it does both, just in different versions of reality. We only experience one. If that's true, there could be a version of Earth where every what if in your life actually happened, good or bad. It could be a world where the dinosaurs never went extinct, another where humans didn't survive the Ice Age. The idea came from quantum mechanics, where particles behave unpredictably until they're observed. Everett argued they never actually choose. All possibilities keep existing, just in separate universes. Most scientists don't think we'll ever detect these other worlds because they don't interact with ours, but it's a neat idea to think there might be endless versions of you out there living completely different lives. The most frustrating part about the many worlds interpretation is that for the longest time there was no way to test it. It's basically impossible to prove, but over the years some physicists started thinking maybe we could detect tiny effects from other universes. Back in 1995, a researcher named Rainer Plaga suggested that under the right conditions, particles in our universe might be able to pass minuscule amounts of energy to particles in a parallel one. Later, other scientists like Howard Wiseman and Michael Hall came up with a version of this idea called the many interacting worlds model. The idea is that each universe isn't completely isolated. They might nudge each other just a tiny bit, and that could explain some of the weird, unpredictable behavior we see in particles, which normally looks just random. Instead of being completely chaotic, that randomness could actually be the result of other universes subtly affecting ours, just enough to leave a faint trace in how particles act. There's also an idea called eternal inflation. So imagine the Big Bang was not a single event, but part of a constant process that keeps creating new bubble universes, each expanding in its own space. We just happen to live inside one bubble, surrounded by others we can't see. Now, if these bubbles sometimes collide, those impacts could leave marks, sort of like bruises in our own universe. Cosmologists have looked for this using data from satellites that map the cosmic microwave background, which is the faint radiation that was left over from the Big Bang. A few weird circular patterns have shown up that some researchers think could be scars, so to speak, from an ancient collision between our bubble and another. Of course, they can't say for sure, but it is a possibility. Back in 2015, a cosmologist named Ranga Ramchari found something while analyzing data from the Planck telescope, which measures leftover radiation from the Big Bang. He noticed certain areas that were 4,500 times brighter than expected. He suggested cautiously that this could be evidence of another universe overlapping with ours. Kind of like we just talked about, bubbles rubbing up on each other and exchanging material. Basically, the energy from that contact could have left behind these glowing marks. And it's interesting because these bright areas were very specific. Didn't line up with any known galaxies or star clusters. I mean, there could be other explanations, sure, but just think about how cool it would be if what we're actually seeing faint signs of another universe, light leading through from somewhere else.
All the way up until the 20th century, more specifically 1846, the small island of Rumeja, located just off the north coast of the Yucatan, was present on almost all maps. And then one day, all of a sudden it disappeared, as though it had never even existed in the first place. Interest in the island peaked in 2008 after it was pointed out that the island, if it's real, would have no real boundaries or oil rights in the Gulf of Mexico. This prompted a large number of search parties to go out and look for the island, but ultimately each and every one of them were unsuccessful, and to this day the mysterious island has never been found. Some people believe that the island either fell to the sea or perhaps never existed at all, but you and I, we know better. And I think just maybe the island did exist, and it still does, only it somehow got bumped to an alternate reality. I mean, it's possible. Anything's possible.
The case of the missing Canadian Pacific Airlines flight of 1951 is one of the most mysterious missing plane cases in history. On July 21st of 1951, the DC-4 aircraft, flying from Vancouver to Tokyo with a stopover in Anchorage, Alaska, seemed to vanish into thin air. Everything seemed routine as Flight 3505 took off from Vancouver. The passengers settled in for their long journey. At about 90 minutes from Anchorage, the flight reported in at the Cape Spencer intersection in British Columbia with an estimated time of arrival in Alaska at midnight. The weather wasn't ideal though. Heavy rain, icing conditions, and visibility of just 500 feet made for a rather treacherous journey, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the radio went silent. As the clock struck midnight and there was no sign of the plane, an emergency warning was issued. The United States Air Force and Royal Canadian Air Force launched a search operation, and for weeks they hunted for the plane and any signs of its 37 occupants. But it was as if it had just vanished into thin air. The search continued until October 31st of 1951 before it was finally called off. No wreckage, no bodies, no clues.
Oftentimes, I lay awake at night and let my mind wander. Strangely enough, more than a few times that wandering has led me to questioning just why the heck we haven't found Cleopatra's tomb. I mean, according to some archaeologists and historians, we're close, but we've been close for years, and still, no cigar. It doesn't make any sense, because according to ancient Egyptian texts, Cleopatra was to be buried alongside her lover, Mark Antony. Furthermore, she was to be buried in a splendid and regal fashion, so why hasn't her final resting place been found? Surely, as one of the most prominent members of Egyptian society, she would have been buried in one of the Great Pyramids, no? So either we're missing a pyramid because we haven't found it yet, or because it no longer exists in this reality, because the gravesite of Cleopatra really doesn't seem like something the ancient Egyptians would have wanted anyone to miss, and it's quite literally written into their ancient texts that she was buried in Alexandria, and said burial was incredibly grand. There is, of course, another theory, and that is that Cleopatra's tomb and the other missing tombs have, since their creation, sunk to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea due to a devastating tsunami that washed over Egypt back in 365 AD. Which one do you think it is?
The Witchcraft, one of the many ships swallowed up by the Bermuda Triangle. On December 22nd of 1967, the Witchcraft, a 23-foot luxury cabin cruiser, vanished without a trace off the coast of Miami. The ship was owned and captained by Dan Burak and was known for its state-of-the-art features. It had a high-tech radio and was apparently built to be unsinkable, but we all know what happens to ships that claim to be unsinkable, don't we? On the evening of its disappearance, Burak and his friend Father Patrick Horgan set out for what was going to be a short cruise along the Miami coastline. Around 9 p.m., Burak radioed the United States Coast Guard to report that the Witchcraft had hit something and was starting to take on water. The Coast Guard immediately dispatched a search and rescue operation, and they arrived really soon. It was just 15 minutes after having received the distress call. But the boat was gone. Not even a small sign of wreckage. The search for the missing vessel continued for several days, but it was never found.
In May of 1957, two sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline, died after being hit by a reckless driver. It was later discovered that the driver, who had been under the influence, had actually killed them purposefully after having her own daughters taken away from her by force. But that's not really the point of the story. The point is that Joanna and Jacqueline's parents were heartbroken, and they wanted to do whatever they could to bring their daughters back. And somehow, on October 4th of 1958, it seems as though they did. Mrs. Pollock gave birth to twin sisters, Jennifer and Jillian, who shared eerily similar traits to both Joanna and Jacqueline. In fact, as they aged, Jennifer even developed a birthmark that looked exactly like the one Jacqueline had on her left hip. And on her forehead, she had a birthmark that matched a small scar Jacqueline had in the exact same location. Furthermore, although the twins grew up in an entirely different town than Joanna and Jacqueline, they both recalled living in Hexham, where the original Pollock sisters had grown up. They could describe in great detail places they had never been before, but that Joanna and Jacqueline had. I'm not sure whether or not this proves alternate realities, but it seems as though something in the universe was not going to stand for a reality in which Joanna and Jacqueline truly ceased to exist.
In 1991, Pam Reynolds was about to go through a terrifying ordeal, brain surgery, but at least she'd be be put to sleep. Little did she know the experience was about to be far more harrowing than she could have ever imagined. This was going to be a highly risky brain surgery, referred to as a standstill operation. Basically, she was going to be clinically dead. Her heart was stopped, her body temperature was lowered, and her brain was going to be unresponsive throughout the entire surgery. It was a pretty extreme measure, but it was the only way they were going to have a chance at removing the large aneurysm in her brain. It ended up being a success though, and Pam fully recovered. But she wasn't out cold like you'd think she would be. Pam described that throughout the surgery, she felt as if she was floating above her body, looking down at the operating room. She could see the doctors and nurses working on her. She saw her unresponsive, basically dead body. She even went into detail about the surgical instruments being used, including a unique saw used to open her skull. She also recounted conversations between the medical staff about her veins being too small and other stuff they talked about. It was pretty insane seeing as her eyes had been taped shut, her ears had been plugged with speakers emitting loud clicks to monitor her brain, and the fact that she was clinically dead throughout the operation. When Pam later recounted her experience, the doctors were completely stunned. The accuracy of her descriptions, especially the surgical tools and the conversations that she just had no way of hearing, it just left the doctors completely baffled. It's still cited as one of the most convincing cases of out-of-body experiences.
Mohenjo-Daro, an archaeological site in Pakistan, might just be evidence of an ancient nuclear war taking place that somehow this reality has completely overlooked. Unusual findings in the area include incredibly high levels of radioactivity in certain layers of soil that have been vitrified, which basically means that they have turned into a glass-like substance due to extreme temperatures, far hotter than any temperature reached by a simple primitive fire. These findings, paired with ancient texts describing advanced weapons with devastating abilities that could produce immense amounts of light and heat, have led many people to believe that an ancient nuclear battle did in fact take place in the area. But there is not enough evidence to definitively support that thought process, so many people believe that the battle actually took place in an alternate reality, after which the battlegrounds somehow ended up in our own. I mean, it would answer the questions of why the areas surrounding Mohenjo-Daro don't share the same anomalous features, but for now, it's anyone's guess, really.
Old Street in Liverpool is known for its trendy shops and cafes, but it's also become famous for something much stranger. Time slips. Stories of people suddenly finding themselves in a different time period. One of the most famous stories involves a man named Frank. Frank was a retired policeman, and one day in 1996, he decided to meet his wife for a coffee on Bold Street. As he walked down the street, he suddenly noticed that everything seemed oddly different. The modern shops had vanished, replaced by old-fashioned storefronts. The people around him were dressed in clothes from the 1950s, and classic cars were parked along the street. Confused and obviously a bit scared, Frank walked into a store called Cripps to buy something for his wife. As soon as he stepped inside, everything changed back to normal. The shop was a modern clothing store, and the old-fashioned atmosphere was gone. Had he just imagined the whole thing? Another strange story happened to a couple shopping on Bold Street in 2006. They were walking past a bookshop when the woman decided to go inside. As she entered, she felt an intense chill and then found herself in an old-fashioned bookstore. The shelves were lined with books that looked like they were straight out of the early 20th century. She quickly left the shop and, to her shock, found herself back in the present, with her husband wondering why she looked so shaken up. You'll find a whole bunch of stories like this online, and even people writing posts detailing their first-hand experiences. The Bold Street time slips have become an urban legend in Liverpool. So what's going on here? Are the stories completely bogus, or maybe just maybe, could there really be pockets of this street acting as portals to other periods in time?
While you might not consider 2006 historic, I guarantee this earth-shattering event will go down in history. Okay, maybe it's not earth-shattering, but it's definitely mind-boggling, and in my opinion, clear evidence of the possibility of an alternate reality. In 2006, a man named Derek Amato suffered a severe concussion after hitting his head on the bottom of a shallow swimming pool. The concussion caused Amato to suffer 35% hair loss as well as a fair amount of memory loss. It also caused him to become an incredibly talented composer, despite the fact that he'd never written music and had never practiced an instrument a day in his life, making this the only known case of someone gaining genius-level talent after suffering from severe head trauma. Amato said that after the incident, every time he closed his eyes, he would see black and white structures moving from left to right that represented his mind in a fluid, continuous stream of musical notation. It really makes no sense how this could have happened, until, of course, you take into account the possibility of alternate realities. Is it possible that when Amato hit his head, he entered into an alternate reality where at the same time the other him hit his head and they somehow switched places? If that's the case, I have to say I feel pretty bad for the other Amato, who probably had a show coming up and now all of a sudden doesn't know a lick of music. Tough times.
In 1977, Kimberly Clark Sharp was treating a heart attack patient named Maria at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. At one point, Maria flatlined. She was clinically dead. The doctors managed to resuscitate her though, and she later described having an out-of-body experience. While floating outside her body, she claimed to have seen a tennis shoe on a high ledge outside the hospital. The shoe was described in detail, a blue, scuffed-up tennis shoe. The story was pretty unbelievable. But all the same, Sharp thought, well, what the heck, I'm gonna take a look. And sure enough, right in the spot Maria had described, there was a scuffed up blue tennis shoe. The level of detail in Maria's account was so precise that it left some wondering if she really had left her body, crossing over into another reality before being brought back down to Earth. Imagine math isn't just a tool we use to describe the universe, but the math is the universe. That's the core idea proposed by physicist Max Tegmark. Think about how many video games can be designed. You can design one where gravity is so strong, one where it's weak, one where the characters can fly, one where they can't, yada yada. Every single game is based on a different set of mathematical rules. Tegmark suggests that every single possible set of consistent mathematical rules doesn't just describe a universe, it is a universe, and that all of these unique equations make up their own alternate universes. Our Earth, the one we live on, is an example of one of these mathematical structures. It's a universe where gravity follows a specific formula, light travels at a specific speed, but there could be an infinite number of other Earths and universes with different mathematical rules that are just as real. Now let's talk quantum immortality. Remember the many worlds interpretation, the idea that every time a decision is made, the universe splits into different possibilities? Now let's apply that to your life. Imagine you are in a situation with a 50-50 chance of survival, like a very dangerous surgery. The moment the choice is made by the universe, essentially, you live or you die, the universe splits into two. One timeline where you survive, wake up, and one where you didn't make it. The concept of quantum immortality suggests, though, that the version of you that is conscious will always find itself in the timeline where you survived. You can never experience your own death because the act of observing yourself dying pushes your consciousness into the branch of reality where you lived. So in a sense, you survive every single fatal accident, every close call, every life-threatening disease, forever jumping from one parallel Earth to the next, always finding the reality where you lived to see the next moment. A pretty comforting thought. And I am not responsible for any reckless risks you decide to take with this information in mind. Please don't do that. When astronomers look at super distant galaxies, they notice something weird about their light. It's redshifted. What does that mean? Well, when a light wave leaves a distant galaxy, it's like a tightly coiled spring. As that light travels toward us across billions of light years, its waves get stretched out. And when light waves are stretched, they shift toward the red end of the color spectrum. That's redshift. The standard accepted explanation for this is that the entire universe is expanding. As the light travels, the empty spaces moving through gets stretched out, which in turn stretches the light waves and makes them appear red. But way back, there was a competing idea called tired light. The idea here was that the universe wasn't expanding, instead the light was just losing energy on its long journey. Here's why losing energy makes it look red. Light color is directly tied to its energy. Red light has less energy than blue light. If light starts its journey as energetic blue light and then slowly loses energy over long distances, it would eventually look like lower energy red light when it finally gets to us, almost like it's getting tired, for lack of a better word. But here's where an alternate universe comes in. What if the light isn't tired from age, but it's actually being drained of its energy by something we can't see? Some think that our visible universe is constantly surrounded by a sea of what's called mirror matter, the same stuff that would make up a mirror Earth. This matter doesn't interact with our light or our forces directly, but it could be affecting light as it passes through it, draining its energy. This energy drain would make the light appear redshifted or tired. When you're watching leaves floating on a pond, there's no wind, the leaves will still drift in different directions by themselves. That's what scientists expected galaxies to do, move around sort of randomly because of stuff nearby pulling on them. Imagine hundreds of those leaves suddenly all start sliding the same way toward the same shore, as if something is pulling on them, only there's no current or wind causing it. Astronomers have seen this with giant groups of galaxies. Instead of drifting every which way, lots of them were all moving together in one direction. So what's going on? Well, some scientists think that way beyond the edge of the part of the universe we can see is pulling. Maybe the edge of another universe. And finally, we have the recursive universe, the idea that the universe and all its parallel Earths is an infinitely repeating pattern. We know that when a very large star dies, its gravity is so intense that it collapses into a black hole. A black hole is a region of space where gravity is so strong that nothing, even light, can escape. The recursive universe theory suggests that the matter that collapses into a black hole might not be destroyed. Instead, the physics inside the black hole cause it to re-expand and become a new self-contained universe. Think of it almost like a Russian nesting doll. Our entire universe, with all its galaxies and planets and our Earth, might have been born from a black hole that exists in a parent universe that we can't see. And if that's true, then our universe may also be constantly creating new universes inside the black holes it forms. Inside the black hole, the center of our Milky Way galaxy, an infant universe could be forming right now, completely cut off and unaware of its parent. Last year, Google pulled off something wild with their new quantum chip called Willow. This chip solved a problem in 5 minutes that would take the supercomputers we have today about 10 septillion years to finish. Hartmut Nevin, the head of Google's quantum AI team, called the result astonishing and said it, quote, lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes. So basically, the idea is that the chip's crazy speed might be explained if calculations are happening across different versions of reality all at the same time. This ties into the many worlds interpretation proposed by physicist David Deutsch, which says that every possible outcome happens somewhere in a multiverse. So in theory, Willow might be tapping into those alternate universes when it solves problems. Unlike regular computers that use zeros and ones, Willow uses qubits, which can hold multiple states at once, letting it handle insanely complex calculations at lightning speed. Imagine you have two specialized coins and you flip them at the exact same time, sending one to New York and keeping the other in London. The moment you look at the coin in London, though, and see it landed on heads, you instantly know the coin in New York is tails, even though no signal or message had time to travel between them. They are entangled. They share a connection that scientists call a shared state. We've talked about this many times before on the channel, but now let's take this to a much bigger scale. Some physicists wonder if this connection could happen not just across space, but across different realities. Maybe the atoms that make up our Earth are somehow entangled with the atoms of a parallel Earth. See, there are mysteries as to how particles behave sometimes. Now, what if when a tiny particle on our Earth does something unpredictable, well, it might not be random. It could be because it's instantly affecting or being affected by its entangled twin particle in a parallel reality. The unpredictable random little movements we see in the smallest particles of our world could actually be the sign of a constant cause and effect relationship with a parallel Earth. String theory is what physicists come up with when they try to find the ultimate theory of everything. They wanted one single set of math that could explain both the super big stuff, like planets and stars, and the super tiny stuff, like atoms, but they ran into a problem. The math for this theory kept falling apart unless they added a ton of extra dimensions. First, let's nail down what we mean by dimensions. We live in a 4D world, 3 dimensions of space to locate anything, left, right, up, down, forward, and backward, and 1 dimension of time to say when an event happened. That's 4 dimensions we experience. For string theory's equations to work perfectly and make sense, they needed far more than 4 though. They needed 10 or 11 dimensions in total. Why? Well, it all comes down to gravity. When scientists try to describe gravity on the smallest scales, like inside atoms, things get confusing. They calculate that the force of gravity packed into a single tiny point should be endless. Since we don't see endless forces in the real universe, the math just breaks down. String theory fixes that by saying everything is made of tiny, vibrating little strings that make up everything in the universe. Imagine everything in the universe, your chair, the air, you. Well, it's made up of tiny, tiny rubber bands. These rubber bands are so small, you can't see them, and they're wiggling and vibrating, kind of like when you pluck a guitar string. How each rubber band wiggles decides what it actually is. One way it wiggles makes it an electron, another way makes it a quark, another way makes it a photon, so on and so on. If the rubber band didn't wiggle, it wouldn't turn into anything. It would just be a useless string. The vibration is what gives particles their identity, so to speak. Different vibrations equals different types of particles. That's why string theory calls it strings, like tiny strings that make everything, but only because they wiggle in that right way. Now, for them to wiggle correctly without breaking the math, they need more space than we can see. That's where the hidden dimensions come in, extra directions for the strings to move so all the particles and forces makes sense. Next up, we have false vacuum decay, a pretty scary idea. This one is less about how a parallel Earth exists and more about how one could replace ours. So, say you had a ball sitting in a slight dip on a large table. Right now, the ball looks stable and everything seems fine, but it's not in the lowest, safest spot it could actually be. That's what scientists call a false vacuum. Somewhere else on the table is a deeper, bigger hole, the true vacuum. If the ball somehow gets nudged over the edge of its little dip, it will roll into the deeper hole. Some scientists think our universe might be like that little dip. Here, atoms are stable, life exists, everything is the way it is right now, but it's technically not the most stable state possible. In quantum physics, tiny random fluctuations happen all the time. Usually they don't do anything noticeable, but in theory, one could just be enough to push the universe from the false vacuum into the true vacuum. That wouldn't be good for us. If that happens, it would create a bubble where the rules of physics are completely different. That bubble would expand at nearly the speed of light, instantly changing everything inside. Atoms could fall apart, matter could dissolve, and our universe as we know it, Earth included of course, would be wiped out and replaced by a completely new reality. The story of John Zagreus is often referenced as one of the eeriest examples of an alternate reality crossing over into our own, at least in some versions of the story anyway. Yeah, this one falls into the realm of urban legends, but it is a pretty great story all the same. The story goes that in 1954, at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, a man handed over his passport, leaving the officials in utter confusion. His passport was from a country called Torrid. If you're wondering what Torrid is, well, it doesn't exist. They looked at the man and he seemed completely normal. He was well dressed and polite, but he insisted that Torrid was a real country located between France and Spain, and he was shocked when the officials told him that that place just didn't exist. The man had other documents too, like a driver's license and bank statements, all from this place called Torrid. His passport even had stamps showing he had traveled to other countries before. The officials were just completely baffled. They checked maps and globes And they were like, are we just crazy? But no, there was no Torrid. They put him in a nearby hotel while they investigated further, and they posted guards outside his room just to make sure he didn't leave. But when they went in to check on him the next morning, he disappeared. The room was on a high floor, no balcony, and the guards swore they didn't see or hear anything strange during the night. His documents also disappeared, leaving no trace of the mysterious man from Torrid. No one could figure out where he came from or where he went. So where does John Zegras come into the picture? Well, there is a documented case of a foreign man being detained in Japan for identity fraud, but it's never been 100% verified if John Zegras' story spawned the legend of the Torrid man or if his case was completely unrelated. All right, y'all know I love my cryptids, and these just might be the coolest cryptids I've ever heard of, neo-dinosaurs. I'd never heard about these till fairly recently. These are exactly what they sound like, sightings of dinosaurs in modern times. And yes, there have been multiple sightings of these things in the Amazon basin, in Bolivia, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. The most common type of neo-dinosaur reported in the Amazon is a large, long-necked amphibious animal that looks a lot like a sauropod. Then there are ones that look like iguanodons, and less frequently bipedal reptiles similar to Allosaurus. There have been tracks discovered that look like dinosaur-type footprints and actual sightings of the creatures themselves, if you can believe it, which most of you I'm sure can't. Fair play. One of the famous tales of these creatures comes from the British archaeologist and explorer Percy Fawcett. That's the guy who claimed to have found the lost city of Z. He claimed to have found these three-toed tracks in the forests of Brazil, and a friend of Fawcett claimed to have seen a large, long-necked reptile near the Brazil-Bolivia border. There were also reports of an iguanodon-like creature in Colombia in 1921, and a Brazilian named Alvaro Mesquita reported encountering a camptosaur-like animal on the shore of a swampy lake between the Purus River and the Juara River. And even as recently as 1995, geology students in Brazil's Sincora Mountains reported seeing two large creatures about 30 feet long with 8-foot necks and tails bathing in a river. Very bizarre. And I can understand why some people may not believe this. I just think it's a really cool idea. One of the most awe-inspiring and well-documented UFO sightings came in 1997. It was March 13th in Arizona, a clear, starry night. People were just going about their usual business when, out of nowhere, strange lights started to appear in the sky. And no, they were not stars. First, there was this V-shaped formation of 5 lights slowly gliding across the state. The lights were first spotted in the town of Henderson, Nevada, around 7:55 p.m., and from there they made their way to Arizona, passing over Prescott and heading towards Phoenix. As the lights moved, more and more people saw them. Hundreds, maybe even thousands, looked up and saw this weird, silent, glowing formation. Some folks described it as a massive, solid object blocking out the stars as it passed. The police were flooded with reports. Phone lines were lighting up in news and radio stations, and the odd V-shaped craft wasn't the only one reported. A police officer in Paulden, Arizona would report seeing a cluster of orange-colored lights. And later, around 10 p.m., there were a number of reports in the Phoenix area of a row of brilliant lights hovering in the sky, or slowly falling. It later came out that the Air National Guard had been carrying out test flights that night, but people were skeptical, and till this day, people still don't buy the official explanation. As for why that is, well, we could do a whole video on this case, but essentially, the military said one of the light formations was a plane, and the other sets of lights were flares, and it just didn't look like that. The story of the Orang Medan is one of the creepiest and most mysterious sea tales out there. It all started in 1947 when a distress call came in from a Dutch freighter named the SS Orang Medan. The message: all officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. Then there was some garbled Morse code, followed by the final words, "I die," which has always creeped me out. Rescue ships were quickly sent to check things out. When they boarded the ship, though, they found that the entire crew was indeed dead. Their bodies were scattered around the ship. Their faces were frozen in expressions of pure terror, and their arms were reaching out like they'd been trying to fight something off. There were no signs of physical injuries, though. The rescuers didn't have much time to figure things out either. Shortly after they arrived, a fire broke out in the ship's cargo hold. They had to abandon the vessel, which then exploded, sinking into the depths of the ocean. And another one of the most mysterious maritime tales in history is, of course, the case of the Mary Celeste. On December 4th of 1872, a ship called the Mary Celeste was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean. It was found completely empty of people anyway. All the cargo, the food supplies, and the crew's belongings, they were all still in place. All that was missing was a single lifeboat. The Mary Celeste had left New York about a month earlier, led by Captain Benjamin Briggs. He was traveling with his wife, his young daughter, and 7 crew. The ship was headed for Italy. Now, everything seemed normal during the journey, and that's because we have the log entries. The last entry in the logbook, too, was just a regular note about the ship's position and weather. There were no clues in these logs about any sign of trouble. There was no sign of a struggle or any kind of damage to the ship. It looked like everyone had just calmly left in the lifeboat. But why? The weather was fine, the ship was in good shape. It was unlikely that pirates had attacked either, because again, nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of violence. To this day, nobody knows what happened to Captain Briggs, his family, or the crew. The North settled in Greenland around the 10th century, creating a colony that lasted for about 500 years. But then, in the late 15th century, they vanished. Now, it's not like it was uncommon for people to relocate back then, but what was strange about this was that they'd left behind a lot of their supplies and belongings. It was like they just evaporated. Historians and archaeologists still haven't come up with a clear answer. But there are theories. One is that environmental changes made life too hard for them, forcing the settlers to leave. Another is that local Inuits may have raided the colony, killing or capturing the settlers, but there weren't any clear signs of an attack. Everything had been left in a pretty tidy manner. If the Inuit had raided the colony, there would have been signs of a struggle, but the site had been found neat and intact. There's also the theory that a plague in the late 15th century, which hit Iceland and Norway, left many farms empty, meaning the Greenland settlers might have returned to Europe to claim the abandoned land, but that doesn't make much sense either. I mean, the Vikings back home would have known that these guys had returned. There wouldn't be much of a mystery, would there? This is a very strange case. Sacsayhuaman is an impressive Incan fort built in the 1400s, just outside of Cusco, Peru. The fort is famous for its massive stone walls, made from stones that each weigh around 100 to 120 tons. What's even more amazing, though, is how these stones fit together, which is perfectly. They also have these smooth finishes, almost like they were melted and then hardened again in a giant kiln. But back then there was no way they could have had a kiln big enough to do something like that. Researchers have been trying to figure out how the Incas managed to mold these stones for years. Some think they might have used mirrors or glass to focus sunlight and heat the stones until they were soft enough to fit together, but there's no evidence of a method like that having been used. Others have theorized that the stones may have been rough at first and then natural fires partially melted them together, but tests have shown that regular fires don't really get hot enough to melt the stone. Here's a theory for you. Maybe the Incas had some kind of a deal with a race of stone carving aliens. That I had to do it. In Jordan and Syria, there are mysterious stone circles spread across the desert plains. Some of these circles are huge. The smallest is about 720 feet wide, and the largest is more than 1,450 feet across. They're all between 3 and 5 feet high, and none of them have any openings or entrances, which is strange because if they'd been used to, say, house animals, you'd think there'd be doors or gates. By that same token, they don't really seem to have been used as burial sites either. The circles are incredibly well formed, though, almost perfectly round, which is surprising given how old they are. Archaeologists think they were built between 4500 BC and 2000 BC, a span of about 2500 years, which really doesn't narrow down their purpose much. Researchers believe there were once even more of these strange stone circles, but many have been destroyed as new towns and settlements were built. Scientists are still trying to figure out why they were used and who built them. There's also a strange circle of stones in Miami. In 1998, while preparing to build new condos in South Beach, developers came across something they'd never seen before. As they were tearing down old buildings and digging deep into the ground, they discovered a circle of 24 large holes, each filled with heavy limestone tablets. This discovery was so unusual that they had to call in archaeologists to investigate. The archaeologists found that these stones were arranged in a perfect circle, about 38 feet across. They also uncovered other ancient items like animal bones, shark teeth, and old axe heads made of basalt rock. After studying the area, the experts estimated that the Miami Circle was about 2,000 years old. The circle is believed to have been created by the Tequesta people, a tribe that lived in the region until the early 18th century. The Tequesta were known to be nomadic. Today, the Miami Circle sits right in the middle of the city. Researchers are still studying the site and the artifacts, but the purpose of the circle and even a lot about the Tequesta themselves still a mystery. Alright, this story is one of the wildest and most mysterious tales from World War II. So in October of 1943 at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the Navy was working on a top secret project to make ships invisible to enemy radar. The ship at the center of all this was the USS Eldridge. The story goes that they were using some kind of high-tech equipment involving powerful electromagnetic fields. When they turned on this equipment, something bizarre happened. The ship disappeared. Not just off radar, but physically vanished from sight. Some say it was teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, and then brought back to Philadelphia in just a few minutes. But the strangest part is what happened to the crew. When the ship reappeared, some sailors had been fused into the ship's metal. Others had gone missing entirely. The tale first came about in 1955 when a man named Carl Allen, who claimed to be a witness, sent a series of letters to a US Navy research organization and a UFO researcher. Of course, the Navy denies that the experiment ever took place, and the letters are often chalked up to a very creative hoax. But there is a small chance something really did happen that day. I mean, hey, who knows? None of us were there.
In our number 5 spot, we have dreams. Out of all the explained phenomena in the world, we've even placed a person on the moon, for Christ's sakes, we have not been able to solve the mystery of our dreams. Researchers are nowhere close to understanding exactly how the mind works, and dreams are an element that are still quite a mystery. Nobody quite knows if dreams are a result of the brain as it rests. The brain perhaps sorts through thoughts, memories, and anxieties, or do we perhaps jump into other worlds and realities in our dreams? Some think both. There's also the phenomenon of astro travel that many have proven to have done in dreams, and were able to give accurate information when they've woken up about what happened while they were dreaming. So yet another phenomenon about dreams we can't explain. But my money is on jumping into alternative realities. I've had too many weird dreams in my life that make me think, yeah, that's probably true. In our number 4 spot, we have Torrid. Okay, this story is kind of wild. Apparently, in the year 1954, there was a man coming into Tokyo Airport in Japan with a passport from a country that didn't exist. The customs officials grilled the man on why he had a fake passport and fake custom papers, and he insisted that his passport and papers were real. He apparently had all kinds of bank statements and documents from a country in Europe called Torrid. Apparently this country has thousands of years of history as well. The man was held in a hotel room for several hours while the government analyzed his papers, only to go into the hotel room and find him to be vanished. Yeah, that's enough proof for me. Clearly he was a person from another reality where Torrid is a country. Cool. What a wild story. I'm surprised that a movie hasn't been made about this yet. In our number 3 spot, we have ghosts. There are some scientific theories out there that possibly tie ghosts to people from alternative realities. I know we usually think of ghosts and think that they're our deceased loved ones who have moved on to wherever, another place. But some scientists have theorized that perhaps ghosts are actually some kind of bleed through from alternative realities, a sort of misfiring of electrons that have landed on a possible wrong plane of existence.
Or perhaps it really is just our deceased loved ones in an alternative reality, and that's where we move on to when we pass away. Who knows, but interesting to think about. In our number 2 spot, we have superposition. Okay, so scientific research has led us to have a good understanding of how the universe works, as we have been able to observe the behavior of electrons and protons, which make up atoms, and in case you don't know, but atoms make up humans and every object on this planet. Something that we have learned through observing protons and electrons is that they can be in multiple places or in multiple states of existence all simultaneously. This has been called superposition. This means that people and things could also possibly exist in multiple states of reality, too, thus proving to me that alternative realities exist. I wonder if there's a reality that I'm a princess. That just feels right. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Large Hadron Collider. There is a Large Hadron Collider that has been subjected to many urban legends over the years. This Hadron Collider is the world's largest and highest particle collider that lies 27 kilometers deep below the surface between the France and Switzerland border. It was originally created by CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, between 1998 and 2008, as a collab between 10,000 scientists and hundreds of labs and universities from over 100 different countries. Anyways, some say that the purpose of this was to possibly create a black hole in reality, but of course this is just hearsay and a theory. Regardless of what they are actually doing down there, they did stumble across some crazy evidence that may further prove the existence of alternate realities. By throwing a bunch of particles around at crazy speeds, these scientists were able to measure how long particles disappeared for, and it has been assumed that they traveled to new dimensions or planes of existence. Apparently, one of the scientists at CERN by the name of Aurélien Barraud has been quoted as saying, "The multiverse is no longer a model. It is a consequence of our models." Fascinating is all I've got to say. I'm obsessed with Interstellar, and apparently that movie did a very good representation as to describing what is believed to be the 5th dimension and what could be assumed as an alternate reality. God, my little 3rd dimension brain is feeling mind blown thinking about all this. I think I'm gonna go take a nap now. In our number 10 spot, we have unknown objects. Over the years, archaeologists have discovered items while on expeditions that they truly can't explain. Objects that cannot be identified as an object of this world, or an object that is so old and doesn't fit with our idea as to what existed during that time. A good example of this is a hammer that was found in London in the 1930s, and this hammer is said to be over 500 million years old when humans weren't known to exist. There is also the Antikythera object that is a stone-like computer that was found near a Greek island. A stone computer? What? These items are from civilizations and times where there is no other data and proof that they existed, and so some have of course concluded that perhaps they are objects left by time travelers or dimension travelers. Or perhaps alien species. I think dimension travelers. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. In our number 9 spot, we have the case of Lorena Garcia. This is a story that was covered in the news around the world because of how different it was, and how it may possibly prove the existence of alternate realities. Allegedly, a young woman by the name of Lorena Garcia woke up one morning to find that nothing was familiar to her. Her home, her friends, job, everything was completely different, as if she was brand new to this planet. Many think that the reason everything was so far off is because she slipped into another dimension. No explanation made more sense, as she was still her and looked like her, and yet everything, her whole world, was completely different. People have speculated that she suffered from memory loss. However, all signs pointed to her being in perfect health, not to mention nothing traumatic had occurred that would make anyone believe that theory. This sounds actually so similar to a popular book called 1,000 Pieces of You. I bet the author based the story off of this story. If you like the idea of alternative realities, then I would very much recommend that book. In our number 8 spot, we have deja vu. This is a phenomena that is widely talked about, as it is seemingly a phenomena that almost everyone experiences. The phenomena that is deja vu is essentially a weird sensation that you have experienced a situation once before. You have a feeling kinda like, yeah, this happened before, or this feels familiar. People try to explain it off as if it is something familiar that you are thinking is similar, or it is some kind of troubleshooting in the brain. There are also other versions of deja vu, such as deja vu, a feeling that you know what's going to happen next, or alter vu, which is the act of remembering your history differently. Similar to the case of Lorena Garcia, where the person realizes that the world around them is unfamiliar and they can recognize their history and recognize the history forming in front of their eyes as well. Pretty trippy. What if psychic predictions are just knowings that we have from other realities, and maybe when they don't happen and we feel sure that they were supposed to happen, then maybe that fate wasn't meant for this reality, but it is meant for another reality. Ooh, interesting. In our number 7 spot, we have the Berenstain Bears phenomena. If you haven't heard of this sign of an alternative reality, then perhaps you did not grow up in the 90s, when literally everyone I speak to that grew up in this time seems to remember this book being called the Berenstain Bears, not the Berenstain Bears as it is seemingly published as today. This has been a popular thread on internet chat rooms for many years now, and so widely talked about. Most people believe it to be a sign that we possibly jumped into another reality in the millennium, or perhaps in 2012, or just in another time, because there are just too many people that are confused about the name change. If we didn't jump into another reality, then I'm convinced some aliens have changed it somehow to mess with all of us. One of the two theories feels about right. In our number 6 spot, we have the many worlds theory. There is a physicist by the name of Hugh Everett who, back in 1957, came up with a theory of multiple realities in quantum mechanics, and he suggested that all possible alternate histories and futures are real, but are within their own worlds. This theory basically states that any possible occurrence that could have happened in reality would be a world of its own. Whoa. It's a theory that is one of the more popular ones in the physics and philosophy world, being added to and expanded upon by other physicists such as Bryce Sillingman DeWitt.
Coming in at number 5 are psychopaths. Juicy, I know. So way back during the eugenics movement, scientists believed mankind could be improved by breeding out the evil and bad ones amongst us. It led to sterilizing prisoners and mental patients by the early 20th century. But Linda Campbell puts forth a theory that psychopaths are spiritually dead, demonized human predators that disguise the fact their mind is demonically filled. Their lack of empathy allows them to ignore reality and impose false realities on others made up of lies. The lack of empathy makes them blind to humanity, and so humans to them can be easily sacrificed, abused, tormented, you name it. It can happen to them. They possess an unlimited amount of demonic energy and get a thrill out of things we would categorize as screwed up. So Linda theorized these people actually exist in a demonically twisted upside down reality where everything they're doing and feeling makes complete sense to them in their reality. Our reality and theirs overlap, and their reality is a devilish anti-world within ours. And how this overlap happened, I have no idea. But it's not the first time blips or overlaps have popped up within this topic. So, at number 4 is The Cabin. It was so hard finding links about this story, it's like the universe just didn't want me to share it and know more, but I will. But anyway, many years ago, a woman and her friends went camping near a forest. They were having a good time, toasting marshmallows, the whole shebang, when they heard some music come from a stone cabin. First of all, I don't know why they weren't suspicious of a random stone cabin in the forest to begin with, but sure. Moving on, when they went to the cabin, they apparently saw a bunch of people wearing 17th century clothing just dancing inside. The woman was almost drawn to it and she tried to enter it, but before she entered all the way, her friend pulled her away and half her body immediately became paralyzed. Yes, the half that entered the cabin. Like out of nowhere, nothing happened, she just became paralyzed. Many believe the woman actually stepped into a dimensional gateway to an alternate reality, but when she was pulled away, she felt a shift that completely threw off her nervous system. I mean, obviously, since our systems don't experience alternate realities frequently, and thus she became paralyzed. Filling Filling a number 3 slot are doppelgangers. It's a tricky subject. How is it possible for someone unrelated to us at all to look exactly like us? Looks are genetic, we look the way we do because of our ancestors, I don't need to explain that, so how can anyone else look exactly like us? From a scientific and biological standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. They're meant to be us in an alternate reality living their lives, but somehow in the configuration of endless possibilities of realities and universes, a glitch occurred and two of the same person ended up in the same reality when technically they shouldn't have been. They're not our clones, they still carry out their own lives like they would have in the alternate reality, except they're here and they look exactly like us. And now at number 2 is Laxaria. Back in 1851, a man called Jofar Vorin was found in a German village speaking a bit of broken, weird German. When locals in the area found him, he said he spoke the languages Ibramian and Laxarian, and that he was from Laxaria, from an area called Sacria, which was separated from Europe by an ocean. He said his world had 5 great compartments, aka continents, called Sacria, Asta, Afla, Eupla, and Osla, which obviously stunned everyone because none of those things exist. He went on to say he was Christian, but that it was also called Aspasian in Laxaria. You may be wondering why he was in Germany to begin with. He could have just easily stayed in Laxaria. He was trying to find his long lost brother, but then suffered a shipwreck on his way and wound up in Germany. Despite looking at many maps, he couldn't trace his route from any shore or find his way back. People believe he's from an alternate universe and somehow ended up in ours. Who knows, maybe he went through his world's version of the Bermuda Triangle, and that's how he got here. And finally, at number 1 are the Green Children of Woolpit. Now in the 12th century, a brother and sister were found near a wolf pit in the village of Woolpit, Suffolk. Yes, they got the name of the village from the wolf pits in the village. Now they looked like normal human kids, except for the fact that their skin was heavily tinged with green. They spoke an unknown language that none of the locals had heard of, would only eat raw beans, and their clothing was just very bizarre. After a while they learned how to eat normal food and lost their green hue, but the boy soon died. The girl, however, learned how to speak English, and she explained how her brother and her had come from a place called St. Martin's Land, which was a subterranean world that only housed green people. She said the sun never shone there and it was twilight all the time. When asked how they got to Woolpit, she said she had no idea. She recalled herding her dad's cattle with her brother and then hearing a loud noise, and then they suddenly just end up near the wolf pit. The girl grew up and got married and led her life, but many people theorize the kids came from an alternate reality but just adapted to ours. For me personally, since it was the 12th century and travel was hard for locals of small villages, maybe the kids were from the Middle East or Asia, which could explain why the locals didn't recognize their language or clothing, but that still doesn't explain how they got there or the greenness of their skin, so maybe I should just stop talking. Starting us off number 10 are dreams. I'm pretty sure everyone in life has wondered what their dreams meant. Anytime I dream of anything traumatic, I always Google it and I'm like, oh my god, I'm about to start a new chapter of my life, or one's about to end, what do I do? Either way, dream travel is a theory that our dreams show glimpses of alternate universes or realities that are beyond ours. In a multiverse where there are endless versions of you and your life, and they've all branched off and have lived different lives, if you're having a really vivid dream to the point it's so lifelike you feel like you're really there, it's possible we're tapping into the experiences and memories of an alternate us. Say if you keep dreaming about living in a different country or having a different job or eating something so detailed you can smell it and taste it, it's been theorized it's because you've probably already experienced those things in another timeline and our sleeping mind somehow lets us access it. Physicists have theorized since our conscious minds' barriers are down during sleep, it allows our subconscious mind to go into the windows between realities and contact the consciousness of our other selves. This suggests that maybe our subconscious mind operates in our own reality and the others all at the same time. Another theory is that despite only seeing one course of events for each action or decision we make, we still imagine what would have happened if we did or chose differently. So based on that, our dreams could be showing us how all those other decisions would have played out if our other selves made them. That was a lot to digest, I know, and there's a lot more to come. Coming in at number 9 is missing time. So I feel like a lot of people will be able to identify with this feeling or experience and yet not know it could very well be evidence of an alternate reality. So this is a story of John Carlson. In the late 70s, John was in high school and his house was about a 1.5-mile walk walk from his school. He walked there and back every day, and it was a pretty straightforward route that he knew very well. One day he was walking home when he saw a bunch of guys that usually bullied him, and he took a different route. Again, even this other route he knew very well. He'd also taken it before, so it wasn't anything new. But on the walk, things just seemed off. Despite school just ending, it was eerily quiet, and he felt like things just weren't real. As he was approaching an intersection, he saw the stores he usually saw there, but the silence persisted. He realized that even though he was walking towards the intersection, the stores and landmarks kept getting further and further away from him. Like a mirage, he didn't understand and started feeling anxious and disoriented, and then blank. A complete loss of memory, and when he awakened, he was on a different street in a different part of town, quite a while away from the intersection he was at before. And he had no idea how he got there, but within a few minutes, his mum pulled up and asked him if he was alright. Normally, his parents never looked for him as long as he came home before dinner, but his mum somehow just knew exactly where he was. When he asked her why she went to look for him, she said she was just doing chores at home when a voice in her head said, "Get John, he needs you." And a lot of people have had the same missing piece of time experience, so they've theorized that perhaps these blips are us crossing into another universe and taking your alternate selves' place and vice versa, so when you swap back, you end up somewhere else and not knowing how you got there. At number 8 we have the Large Hadron Collider, LHC for short. CERN, which is the European Organization for Nuclear Research, restarted their newly upgraded LHC in order to find out more about dark matter and look for tiny black holes that could be gateways to alternate universes. This LHC is the world's most powerful particle accelerator, and the point of it is to try and recreate the conditions present during the Big Bang to see what kind of matter was produced. Its other project is finding those tiny black holes. A paper published by scientists at the University of Waterloo proposed a way to prove black holes connect our universe with other universes, so CERN intends on testing and proving their hypothesis. If they do, and it's likely that they do, it'll be the first experiment that proves the existence of alternate realities ever. Hopefully they also find out how to transition from this reality to that one. Thanks. Filling our number 7 slot is the Bermuda Triangle. I've been interested in the Bermuda Triangle ever since I found out people and airplanes and ships go missing in the area. There's just too much intrigue to not be interested. It's mysterious, things disappear, time and space becomes distorted. It's like a world of its own. The first article ever written about the place dubbed it the Sea of the Devil, which is just not the way you want to debut into the world of print. It's really not. Over the past century, there have been hundreds and hundreds of large air and sea vessels that have just disappeared. Other cases involve perfectly intact and working sea craft completely abandoned by their crew and the crew never being found. Eyewitnesses who have been and survived recall compasses going crazy when they entered the area, unusual clouds, and entering a rotating substance and exiting through a luminescent curtain of some kind. I don't know. Scientists like Einstein and Michio Kaku came up with theories about the refraction of time. Kaku had a theory about the river of time, saying it can lead to the formation of whirlpools of time in which it's possible to enter into different time spaces and that the river can fork into many directions. And obviously those different time spaces have alternate realities. The founder of the spiritual practice Falun Dafa said the triangle is definitely a gateway to another reality, but it's just very unpredictable. If the door happens to be open, then a ship could slip in for a moment and come back out by accident, but that second could be decades in our world because time is different in every dimension. What do you guys think? Now at number 6 is the Desert Blip. Back in 1972, 4 girls were coming back from a Utah rodeo and they took the Utah Highway 56. Since their landlady had a really strict 12 AM curfew and it was already 10:30, the girls decided to take a shortcut off the highway which went towards Gadianton Canyon. They were driving on black asphalt for a while, but somewhere along the way it transformed into cracked concrete. The girls encountered a dead end and went back the way they came, but it took them a few minutes to realize their surroundings had completely changed. They went from driving in the desert to driving by lush fields of wheat near a large lake. At this point the girls had no idea where they were, and in the distance they saw a light coming from a building. So they went towards it, and when they got closer they saw the neon sign spell out a message which they couldn't read. The letters or symbols were twisted lines and curves, a language none of the girls had ever seen before. Then all of a sudden extremely tall men started pouring out of the building and started waving their arms and pointing at the girls and then coming towards them. They looked human but they weren't, and the girls took off screaming and crying. 30 seconds later they realized the people were following them in egg-shaped vehicles that had one headlight, 2 front wheels, and 1 rear. They drove back into the canyon and soon lost the eggs, but wow, I really wonder where the hell they ended up. I'm convinced it was another universe. This sign, I can just imagine the sign being one of those fonts on Word that you have no idea what it's saying. It's probably one of those. Coming in at number 5 are ghosts. Now I know ghosts are almost always exclusively linked to the dead, and that ghosts are known to just be dead people haunting us or their spirits, but that's actually never been proven. We keep looking towards science for the answers, but the answer may be a lot simpler than we think. People have offered that ghosts are actually living beings from a parallel universe. They could very easily be visions through breaches between planes and into alternate realities that exist in unison with ours. That's why we can never see ghosts that well. They're always just mirages. They could just be real people that are flickering into our worlds from theirs, and we could very well be doing the same in their world. For all I know, I could be appearing as a vision over there right now, but some little kid probably is shitting himself thinking I'm a ghost. Another explanation for ghosts could be that they're humans that live with us but exist in a totally different realm or timeline, hence they're never fully here and we can't observe them properly with our senses. But maybe they can with theirs. I would take that explanation over them being evidence of the afterlife any day because it's just a lot less scary and I can sleep better at night that way. At number 4 is ancient light. Caltech cosmologist Ranga Ramchari found evidence of cosmic bruising, which he thinks is evidence of a parallel universe. Cosmic bruising basically means one universe bumping against another universe. In his study published in the Astrophysical Journal, he said cosmic bruising may explain an anomaly in a cosmic microwave background produced using data from ESA's Planck Observatory. When he compared the map created to a map of the night sky, he found this unexplainable blob of bright light. The cosmic background shows bursts of ancient light displaying radiation signatures from just a few 100,000 years after the Big Bang. And I know that seems like a long time, but in the bigger picture it's probably like a minute. Ancient light is the result of the recombinations of electrons and protons that initially teamed up to make hydrogen. And hydrogen only gives off a limited range of visible light, so all astronomers know which colors they should be and which colors they shouldn't be. And the blob he found on the map wasn't the color it should have been, and he posited that our universe may have just simply been a region within another eternally inflating superregion. That's nice. Filling our number 3 slot is quantum mechanics. Science teacher Eamon is back at it again, people. And I don't know how I'm going to make quantum mechanics easy to understand in 1 minute, but I'm going to try, so bear with me. And for the record, none of this is in dispute, so you can't slate me in the comments because even scientists aren't doing it, so haha. Now, so quantum particles exist at the subatomic level and are the smallest particles in existence. Well, from what we've discovered so far. These particles exist in a superposition state, which means they either exist in 2 places at once or they're spinning in 2 different directions simultaneously. That's their standby state. Are we understanding so far? Are we all getting this? I feel like that was a simple part. I cannot make this simpler, believe me, I tried. So this is the hard part. When these particles are not being observed in their standby state, they're taking on every possible state, position, configuration that they can. And when they're observed, the state or configuration that they're in becomes adopted, and so that's set in stone now. But at the same time, it spawns like billions of other alternate timelines in the process. Basically, these particles can be in so many configurations and all of them represent an alternate version of reality, but we literally can't even begin to count how many possible combinations of factors and outcomes there are, but it's science. Heck, even physicists haven't even fully understood it. How am I meant to make you guys understand it on YouTube? But I think that was pretty easy to understand, and it also makes your mind wander to every possible thing that can happen, or could happen, or is happening. Dun, dun, dun. Now at number 2 is the black hole theory. So black holes are apparently useful for something other than stretching us into non-existence. Now the idea of black holes being gateways to parallel universes has been part of sci-fi plots for like 5 ever. But Stephen Hawking himself believes in parallel universes, and he calculated that black holes aren't just giant sinkholes where nothing ever survives. In his final calculations, he discovered that mathematically black holes must end. Eventually they have to, they just do. Based on his calculations, he realized black holes actually start to leak information and eventually explode, and that explosion would release previously trapped particles in any form. Emphasis on any if you didn't get that the first time. Being ejected via explosion wouldn't just throw someone back to where they came from, it would make them reappear somewhere else, most likely an alternate universe, and who knows what form they'll even reappear in. And finally, finally, at number 1 is The Professor. Now this story took place in the early 1970s on the campus of the University of the Andes in Venezuela. A prominent unnamed professor has been missing for the last 40-50 years, and how he disappeared has led people to believe he slipped into a parallel world. One afternoon, many students saw him walking across the parking lot of one of the buildings. He even stopped to chat with a student as he went to his car. He got to his car, he saw some students wave at him, and he waved back. And when he finally got into the car and closed the door, he straight up disappeared. And I'm not talking disappeared as in he drove away and was never seen again. No, the car was never driven, it was just stood there and he sat in the car and disappeared into thin air. After police conducted interviews with witnesses, it was concluded no one saw him get out of the car either. The story was so big it was even covered by El Tiempo, one of the largest Venezuelan newspapers. Like, how did he just disappear like that? Mind blown. Starting us off at number 10 is the cold spot. According to a study published by the Royal Astronomical Society, there's a patch of cool space called the cold spot which can be seen in the radiation produced by the Big Bang more than 13 billion years ago. It was first discovered by one of NASA's satellites in 2004 and then confirmed by ESA's Planck mission in 2013. The latest study actually ruled out the pre-existing explanation for this, which was that the cold spot was an optical illusion produced by a lack of intervening galaxies. One of the authors of the study said the cold spot could very well be caused by a collision between our universe and another bubble universe. Every bubble universe has its own laws of physics that could be similar to ours or completely different. So that ending statement still makes everything inconclusive, but it may be evidence. Coming in at number 9 is Deja Vu and Co. So pretty sure we've all experienced deja vu multiple times in our life, so I'm not gonna bother explaining it. But the Co part of the title was referring to other phenomenons. The first being deja vu, which means you instinctively know what's about to happen next, and the second being alter vu, which is when someone feels like their whole history has been altered somehow. So to make that clearer, when certain memories just aren't really meshing with reality, that's what alter vu is. And deja vu and deja vu are said to be memories bleeding into our reality from an alternate self. Alter vu, on the other hand, is meant to indicate being transferred to a completely new timeline and universe while still remembering things from your previous one. So next time you feel any of these things, just think twice and think very deeply about what's going on. At number 8 we have the Mandela effect. And now we have talked about the Mandela effect in another video, but if you haven't seen it then I'll give you a quick recap. So the Mandela effect was formed by paranormal researcher Fiona Broom, who realized she remembered a huge historical event completely differently to everybody around her. She said she clearly remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 80s, when in real life, or at least this reality, he died in 2013 at home. She didn't understand this because she remembered his death so vividly. She voiced her doubts online and realized there were so many other people who shared the same memory as her, to the point they remember being taught about his death in the 80s in school. There's another example, like in Star Wars, most people remember Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father." Me definitely included, but the actual line is, "No, I am your father." I feel like really hardcore fans will know that, but clearly I'm not. She then formulated the idea that this huge gap between reality could very well be because some people, and in this case the people who remember the 80s death, had somehow managed to splinter off and shift between parallel dimensions, but still kept in contact with, I guess, this dimension. Hence their memories of an old and different timeline doesn't always line up with our world, or our timeline, and that was coined the Mandela effect. The end. Filling our number 7 slot is eternal inflation. So this isn't a physical piece of evidence, but it's a significantly backed up scientific theory, so good luck to me trying to explain this. So let's start at the start. The Big Bang was an event that created our universe when it expanded outwards faster than the speed of light, and that process is called inflation. I honestly feel like Bill Nye the Science Guy right now. So according to cosmologist Alexander Vilenken, some areas of space-time stop inflating but others keep expanding. In that regard, the Big Bang stopped expanding all of a sudden for our universe, but according to the theory of inflationary multiverse, it kept expanding into multiple parallel universes, creating more and more infinite realities, and we just happen to be one of them. If they do exist, they're a bubble universe probably right next to us or even overlapping with us. Now at number 6 is the case of Elenia Barcia. Now this Spanish woman woke up in her Madrid apartment one day and was hit with the realization that something was very, very wrong. She didn't recognize the bed sheets she had just woken up on, some items from her apartment were missing, whereas there were some items she had never never even seen before. But the worst part was her boyfriend. She just couldn't find him anymore. She then tried to look for his number in her phone, couldn't find it. She asked her friends about him, none of them knew who she was talking about. She then reported him missing to the police, and they told her there was no records of that person even existing. A psychiatrist offered that perhaps Lenia was hallucinating due to stress, but she vehemently disagreed. She wasn't stressed, something was wrong. She went to visit her family and spoke about her sister's surgery that had happened a few months prior, and her parents and sister had no recollection of that event. Even when she went to work, everything was anarchy. She now worked for the same company, but in a different department in a different part of the world. She told her boss she was ill and went home, even though she had to figure out who her boss was, yet the boss seemed to know her pretty well, yet she didn't know him at all. She's never been declared mentally ill, and she's not a drinker or a drug user, but she thoroughly believes that she slipped into another universe, only a bit different from her own universe, but now she can just never get back there, because she doesn't even know how she got to this one to begin with.
And that's not all on this topic. Along with oddly bright patches, they've also noticed an oddly cold spot. Scientists have been looking into it for years. They call it, see if you can guess, the cold spot. This one area is significantly colder than the rest, and it's way too large to easily explain. Some researchers think it might be caused by a massive void in space, a region where there are just less galaxies, meaning less radiation. But others have floated another idea, one that's a lot more tantalizing, that this cold spot could be another sign of a collision with a parallel universe. The hypothesis is that if two universes brushed against each other early on, that contact could have created a cooler, distorted area we can still spot today. Satellite missions like the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe and Planck both confirm the cold spot does exist, but no one agrees on what actually caused it. So for now, one of the most logical explanations might actually involve another universe, which is pretty cool. When scientists first mapped the faint radiation left over from the Big Bang, they expected it to look like random noise. Every direction of the sky should have been more or less the same, because the early universe was supposed to be uniform, but that's not what they found. There's this odd pattern in the data called the axis of evil. Basically, some of the largest patterns in that radiation map seem to line up in the same direction, and strangely enough, that direction matches the flat plane of our solar system, the same plane our planets orbit on. In theory, that shouldn't happen. Our solar system is tiny and it formed billions of years after the Big Bang, so you wouldn't think it would have any connection to that ancient light. Some scientists have an interesting idea about this, that maybe there's some kind of external force, something beyond what we can see, that's shaping the very structure of the universe itself. Obviously, no one's proven this yet, but the fact that the pattern even exists, pretty strange. The name Axis of Evil came from how unnerving the pattern was when it was first discovered, like some invisible hand was tugging the universe in a specific direction. One thing is for certain though, this seems to go against one of the most basic assumptions in cosmology, that the universe is the same everywhere. And if that's not true, it opens the door to a lot of strange possibilities. There's also an idea in cosmology that if another universe ever collided with ours, it would leave behind a kind of wake, kind of like a boat cutting through water. The waves that spread out after are the cosmic equivalent of what might happen if two universes brushed against each other during the expansion of the Big Bang. Physicists Matthew Klebin, Thomas Levy, and Chris Sigurdsson have modeled what that wake might look like. They don't think it'd be an explosion or a visible scar. Instead, it would show up as faint, disc-shaped pattern in the cosmic microwave background, maybe even changing the way galaxies formed across space. So far, nothing's confirmed, but just the idea alone is exciting, especially when you consider this is a real hypothesis being studied by serious physicists. If they ever find one of those hypothetical wakes, that would be the first measurable sign that our universe may not be alone. One of the strangest ideas out there isn't about another universe exactly, but a kind of copy of our own, one that's invisible to us. Some physicists call it the mirror world. In this version, every particle we know has a hidden twin, so to speak, made of mirror matter that wouldn't reflect light or react to anything the way normal matter does. The only thing connecting it to us would be gravity. It could be a mirror Earth orbiting a mirror sun, or right now, completely undetectable. This idea actually came up while scientists were trying to explain the Hubble tension, a problem where different methods give slightly different measurements for how fast the universe is expanding. A 2022 paper from scientists at the University of New Mexico proposed that if a mirror world exists, its gravity might subtly affect our universe, enough to explain the different measurements. If that's true, there could be a whole hidden universe existing right on top of ours without ever bumping into it. We wouldn't be able to see it, but its gravity might still pull on things in our universe, possibly affecting how galaxies move or how space itself is shaped. In Antarctica, a balloon experiment called ANITA, which stands for the Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, was designed to detect cosmic rays, high-energy particles that hit Earth from space. But a few years ago, ANITA picked up something that didn't seem to make any sense. It detected ultra-high-energy particles coming up through the Earth, as if they'd passed straight through the planet. Scientists had never seen anything like this before, and when ANITA kept picking up the same weird signals, scientists started throwing out some pretty trippy-sounding ideas to explain it. One was that the particles weren't from our universe at all, that they might have come from a parallel universe, one created at the same time as ours in the Big Bang, but moving in the opposite direction through time. But why would they think time would be moving in the opposite direction here? Well, the idea comes from how the math behind the Big Bang works. It's symmetrical, meaning if you flipped it backward in time, the equations would still hold up. Some scientists think it could mean the Big Bang created not one, but two universes. Ours, where time moves forward, another, where time flows the other way. In their perspective, we'd be the ones going backward, of course. What does this have to do with the odd particles moving up through the Earth, though? Well, ANITA's data caught scientists' attention because the particles seemed to be moving in a way that just doesn't fit with how things work in our universe. So a few scientists suggested maybe those particles were actually crossing over, traveling from that universe into ours. One of the most basic assumptions in cosmology is that the universe looks the same in every direction. That's what scientists call isotropic. But when scientists look closely at the distribution of galaxies and radiation, there are hints that's not perfectly uniform. There's a small but obvious directional tilt. The universe seems to be slightly lopsided. A few studies have found something called dipolar modulation, meaning one side of the sky looks just a bit different from the other. That shouldn't happen if the universe expanded evenly after the Big Bang. Some researchers think it might mean we're seeing the effects of something. What? We can't say for sure, but it could mean that the part of the universe we can see is not completely isolated. In other words, there might be stuff just outside our observable universe that's massive enough to pull on galaxies inside our area.